Hello and welcome to Jay Coletti's Racket Reviews. My name is Jay Coletti and I will be your hostess. Here on Racket Reviews, we are dedicated to learning about all things organized crime, and today I'm really looking forward to having a discussion with you about the man whom I believe it is fair to call the Godfather of organized crime entertainment, and that of course is Mario Puzo. If you are a first-time viewer of Racket Reviews, welcome to the channel. I hope you have a great time here. If you're a seasoned viewer, you're probably noticing that this is the first episode where I'm in my new studio. Finally, I'm overjoyed with the results. I hope you love it as well. If you're enjoying the channel and would like to become a Racket Reviews patron, please head on over to that Patreon account and join the Coletti family. Now, without further ado, we have much to discuss, so let's get right to it. Many a Mafia enthusiast first found their fascination with the topic starting in the realm of fiction, including myself. It was after reading The Godfather and later watching the laudworthy film that I began diving deeper into the topic of organized crime, specifically of the Italian persuasion. I'm not alone in this, of course. The Godfather is rightly listed as one of the best films ever made, and although the book's author insists that the book is more of a family story than a crime story, it would be nearly impossible to meet the Corleones and not feel inclined to at least take a second look at their family business. Knowing this story started my fascination with the topic, I was determined to give the Racket Reviews audience a thoughtful, thorough review of the genre-altering film. Perhaps fortunately or perhaps unfortunately, there is so much content and commentary on the Godfather movies that I had no idea where to begin. When I say there's a ton of content, I mean there is everything from overviews of the story, deep dives about various themes, commentary on the power dynamics using the camera work, top 5 or top 10 facts you probably didn't know videos, heck, even a full commentary about the film by Francis Ford Coppola himself. Honestly, I felt like I didn't have anything new to tell you when it came to this prolific film. I began looking into other topics when I started remembering one of the things I had learned when researching this topic before. That being that some of the traditions that are established in The Godfather were not actually common practice in the real Cosa Nostra until after the film's release, such as referring to the family boss as Don, then his last name, like Don Corleone. That thought passed through my mind. Wow, imagine creating such a powerful work of fiction that you influenced the real-life organization on which your story is based. And then bada bang, it hit me like a thunderbolt, I should do an episode dedicated to the story's author. Mario Francis Puzo, the City College of New York lists his middle name as Gianluigi, was born on October 15, 1920, to Antonio and Maria Leconti Puzo in Hell's Kitchen, New York City. He had 6 siblings. Some sources mistakenly report that he had 11 siblings, and his life growing up was far from ideal. Antonio and Maria Puzo, both immigrants from Pietro di Fusi, Italy, a province of Avellino, had anything but a healthy marriage. Antonio, by trade a railroad trackman for the New York Central Railroad, was unhinged, and by the time Mario was 12, would be committed into the Pilgrim State Hospital Asylum with a diagnosis of schizophrenia. He would leave his wife behind to raise their 7 children alone. For what it's worth, this is where I believe Puzo found his inspiration to so lovingly, but realistically, describe and bring to life the thoughts and motivations of all the women in his stories. Not only mothers, although that's obvious as well. This is evident in his novel The Fortunate Pilgrim in particular, but I would even venture to say The Godfather itself. I know many people get hung up on Don Corleone's line about how women can be careless and men cannot, and say that Puzo's work is anti-feminist. I would agree that The Godfather is far from a feminist manifesto, but that doesn't mean that the women are portrayed inaccurately, only in their weakness. And please don't come for me in the comments for saying that, and allow me to explain. Although Puzo frequently writes female characters either through the perspective of the male protagonist, or in the throes of a romantic encounter, when the women are given center stage in the stories, we can see that their motivations come from more than just a desire to please men, or be some sort of ornamentation. But the fact of the matter is, the women are not always the protagonist of the story, and that's okay. Having an accurate representation of women doesn't necessarily mean that every character, or even the main character, has to recognize her inner struggle or strength or realize she had something to contribute all along. That's not necessary for it to be accurate. Characters in the story are allowed to be complex and have a view of women that doesn't toe the line of today's standards, especially when you're writing a story about Italian immigrants in a post-World War II America. Moreover, Puzo's novel The Fortunate Pilgrim does have a female protagonist, obviously fashioned after his mother, who even gives the counter to Don Corleone's famous or infamous "women can be careless" line. For a refresher, Don Corleone's line is as follows: "I spent my whole life trying not to be careless. Women and children can afford to be careless, but not men." Lucia Santaangelucci Corbo, the protagonist, who by the way is raising her children after her husband went insane, says of the opposite sex that men should control the money in the house, have the power to make decisions that decided the fates of infants. What folly. Men were not competent. More, they were not serious. I also just have to say that the idea that women can be careless and that men can be unserious is a pretty accurate representation of the weaknesses of either sex. In The Fortunate Pilgrim, which was written before The Godfather, women are shown in their strength and men in their weakness. The roles were reversed in the latter novel. More than fair representations of women in a time and genre where that was extremely rare can be attributed to Puzo's mother. Puzo would go on to explain that his mother's voice was in his ear while he was writing Don Corleone's dialogue, saying, "Whenever the Godfather opened his mouth, in my own mind, I heard the words of my mother. I heard her wisdom, her ruthlessness, and her unconquerable love for her family and for life itself. Qualities not valued in women at that time. The Don's courage and loyalty came from her. His humanity came from her." As a young man, Puzo would join the military in World War II, serving in the Army Air Force in Germany, and attain a rank of corporal. After his time in the military was finished, Puzo would marry a German woman by the name of Erika Lena Brosk in 1946. The couple would go on to have 5 children together. Later, he would graduate from the City College of New York. He would also go on to attend Columbia University as well. By 1950, he had published his first short story called The Last Christmas, and by 1955, he would publish his first novel, The Dark Arena, a story about an American who served in World War II, but had a hard time adjusting back to civilian life. He would then move to Germany and fall in love with a German woman and encounter the German fallout following the war. We can see again how much Puzo's own life is reflected in his works, not only in The Godfather and The Fortunate Pilgrim. Puzo would enjoy a medium amount of success from his writing. In 1960, Puzo would find steady work as a government clerk, but would continue working in writing, which was his passion. In addition to the government job, he was an assistant editor for men's pulp magazine entitled Male and Men. He would also continue writing himself under the pen name of Mario Clary, with the magazine called True Action. True Action was yet another pulp magazine that specialized in the sort of ultra-hunk, mega-war hero sexploitation type of little stories that came to exemplify the 20th century pulp fiction. As a quick aside, pulp fiction, not the movie, but fiction, referred to as pulp, was called this in reference to the cheap pulp paper on which the stories were written. The more expensive pieces of content were referred to as glossies in reference to the high-quality paper on which they were printed. Mario Puzo was the definition of a man of his time. He was involved in every aspect of what made that era something interesting. World War II, the height of the pulp fiction storytelling, organized crime, the movie industry, the clash between tradition and modernity. And as we continue through his life, you will continue to see how much of a man of his time Puzo really was. Inspired by authors such as Hemingway and Dostoevsky, it was at this point in his career that he would begin writing the story, which would be published in 1969, that would make him a household name, and that story, of course, is The Godfather. It's funny to think that such a groundbreaking masterpiece would be discussed in such blasé terms by its author, but here's what Puzo had to say about it. Puzo has said of The Godfather that he wrote it because the topic had more widespread appeal and he wanted to make money, saying, "You know, I was working as a government clerk, and then I was working on the magazines, the adventure magazines, and I figured I had 5 kids and I thought I better make some money." Well, one thing was for certain, Puzo would make his money. The Godfather was an instant hit, like lightning in a bottle. It would remain on the New York Times bestseller list for 67 weeks in a row. Another interesting fact is that the story that we all know so well actually wasn't the final draft. In Puzo's own words, "I always wish I'd written it better because I went away to Europe and I left the manuscript with my publisher and I said, I've got to do one more rewrite. But when I came back, they had sold the book for $450,000 to a paperback publisher. I didn't dare rewrite it. I figured they would take their money back, they wouldn't like it." Conversations about translating the novel to film were almost immediately begun, which the behind the scenes of the filmmaking is a story completely of its own. But Puzo was reluctant to the idea of creating the screenplay. Many novelists would do anything to not only have the type of success that gets Hollywood knocking on your door, but the idea of also having the opportunity to oversee the creative process of a film would be like a dream come true. But not in Puzo's opinion, however. He was at first not interested in taking that job, but once again, the money was just too good. One might say that they made him an offer he couldn't refuse. Well, I mean, those screenwriters that are writing out there, they've got a tough job, you know, but they make a very good living. And to me, if you are writing, I think long novels, that takes 4 or 5 years. You sit down and write a screenplay, and you do it in 2 or 3 months, and they give you enormous amounts of money, and you can't say no. That's the way Puzo tells the story anyway, but maybe it's because of the rose-colored glasses of hindsight that's how he really remembered it, but the truth was that he was in tremendous gambling debt and needed a paycheck. The idea that success after success and opportunity after opportunity were just piled onto Puzo's plate is a rather childish one. It's also why I believe many insist that Mario Puzo must have had mob connections, since his book was so in-depth, the characters were so relatable, and his success was realized at such breakneck speed. But after seeing that Puzo was simply a man with a powerful imagination and narrative voice, coupled with a propensity toward vice, we get the picture of a man not taking his time and pondering fictional worlds over his vintage typewriter, but instead a man under strict deadlines and deep in debt trying to protect his family from the consequences of his mistakes, using the skill with which he had been blessed to do so. Puzo was much more like a talented Renaissance artist who was trading his craft in order to maintain his lifestyle as fast as he could, rather than this sort of aloof, professor-like writer smoking a pipe in his loft and dreaming about fantasy worlds. Puzo was in talks with Paramount Pictures about making his Mafia story a film before he had even finished the final draft. Well, penultimate draft of the story. A talent scout from Paramount had found his first 60 pages of the book and wanted to cut a deal with Puzo right away for the movie rights, a $12,500 option for the work, with an additional $80,000 if the finished story was made into film. Despite Puzo's agent insisting that he turn down this deal, Puzo saw dollar signs and agreed, and this was in 1967. You can see now how a book released in 1969 can have a movie deal immediately and a completed movie in 1972. The fact of the matter is, everything was already in works before the book itself was even published. No matter the reason why, it's a good thing Puzo agreed to be so involved in the film because, without him, it's very likely that we would not have had Marlon Brando cast as Don Corleone. It's almost impossible to imagine another actor filling that role. Plus, Puzo would go on to win an Oscar for Best Adapted Screenplay. He would quickly sign with, and get to work on, The Godfather 2, which would be released in 1974. Another major hit for the author and screenwriter, and, according to many movie critics, a better movie than Godfather 1. I would love to hear your thoughts down below about the topic of Godfather 2 versus Godfather 1. I am able to be persuaded on this. I've been on both sides of that fence, so please let me know your thoughts on that below. Puzo would even sign on to help work on the screenplay for the 1978 Superman film, a job which he once again initially rejected, but after finding out how much debt he was in, this time to the IRS, an extremely ruthless Don, he agreed to the project. Marlon Brando would join Puzo on this project, playing the role of Jor-El, Superman's Kryptonian father. A small role, no doubt, but it was fun and interesting to see these two men collaborating once more in a film. It would seem that for the first time in Puzo's life of scrambling to survive, that things were beginning to look up. That was until 1979. Puzo's wife and mother of his children, Erica, would die of breast cancer in November of 1978. She was 58 years old. Puzo's life would then take such a strange turn that it almost sounds like something that would come out of one of his novels. Heartbroken over the loss of his wife, Puzo would seek comfort in the arms of his wife's former nurse, Carol Gino. Which, frankly, if there are any nurses out there watching and you want to try to pull this act with my husband in the future, well, just prepare to be haunted. That's all I'm saying, okay? This is how you get ghosts. Anyway, Puzo and Gino would begin a romance that would last the rest of Puzo's life. The two never got married and were in fact direct opposites in nearly every sense of the word, but it worked somehow. Gino writes about this extensively in her book Me and Mario, Love, Power, and Writing with Mario Puzo, author of The Godfather. I encourage you to check the book out yourself, but in essence, Gino describes herself as a twice-divorced feminist and Puzo as a kind-hearted patriarch. I'll confess the book itself is not my cup of tea. The romanticized memoir has just never been something I'm interested in reading. I will say, however, that seeing Gino's prose, it's evident that she took cues from Puzo's writing. Allow me to give you some samples from that. After all the wonderful places he had taken me, after all the expensive gifts he had bought me, after all of the 5-star hotels we stayed in, and all the exquisite restaurants we ate in, after all the celebrities we met, and every other exciting thing we'd done together, my most priceless memory is that when I needed it the most, Mario Puzo said, "I'll never let you go down in defeat." Humble brag alert. Honestly, it sounds like this relationship was a whirlwind, and it truly does sound like the type of love affair that you would find in a Puzo novel. I do believe from Gino's writings, however, that in this new relationship, after Puzo had already known so much success, that he could experience a type of love that a man doesn't usually experience with his wife, especially if the two are married young. Puzo, as I mentioned, was already successful, and he would not know and never knew any type of poverty in his relationship with Kara, which she makes so abundantly clear in the prologue of her book. Puzo was allowed to project back onto his past the beliefs that he had cultivated from success, and his wife wasn't there to remind him that it wasn't quite so romantic or easy at the time. Let me give you an example, as I think that makes it a little clearer. Puzo said to Gino one day, "A person should only be a writer if he or she has no choice, never to make money. It's too much of a long shot." That directly contradicts the truth about why he wrote The Godfather in the first place, but I suppose one could say that men are always saying things that are rather unserious and women are always carelessly falling for it, but maybe that's just my observation. In the end, Mario would go on to write several books and obtain writing credits in a multitude of movies as well. In all, he would write 10 fictional books, 2 of which were published posthumously, Omerta, which I read, and was unfortunately pretty bad, and The Family, which I have become interested in reading after doing this research. The Family is a fictionalization of the Borgia family in the style of a crime novel that was completed by Carol Gino. Puzo also published 2 non-fiction books and, to my surprise, 1 children's book by the name of The Runaway Summer of Davy Shaw. He had 14 screenplays and film adaptations, 1 short story, as well as 11 that I could find, writing credits under his pseudonym of Mario Clary. He would also receive credit for his intellectual properties in The Godfather and The Godfather 2 video games. Mario Francis Puzo, who was noted to be prone to strong drink, good food, and cigars, would die of heart failure at his Bayshore home on July 2nd, 1999. He was 78 years old. He would be buried next to his wife at North Babylon Cemetery in Babylon, New York. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Racket Reviews discussing the life and times of the godfather of organized crime fiction, Mario Puzo. As a man so marked by the 20th century, it seems fitting that his last year of life was the last year of the 20th century. Make sure to let me know in the comment section below or on Facebook and Twitter what you think about Mario Puzo. Also, don't forget to utilize the comment section and social media to let me know about who or what you would like to see covered next. I always love hearing from you, and I'm always happy to investigate. Make sure to like, subscribe, and click notifications to get more Mafia content sent directly to your subbox. Ciao.